Hey everyone, this is Victor from Cyborg for Life, and I want to welcome you to episode 67 of Limb Lengthening Live, where the patients get to interview the guests. And today we are joined by a limb lengthening and deformity reconstruction surgeon hailing from Stellenbosch, South Africa, with a down-to-earth demeanor and a heart of gold caring for his patients. He's a master of the external fixator. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Lord of the Rings, Dr. Franz Birkholtz. What's up, Dr. B? How are you?
Hey, everybody. No, I'm fantastic. Thank you. I like the applause. That's a nice touch.
He likes the applause. Yeah, absolutely. You deserve way more than the applause. Guys, I don't know if you know that I interviewed Dr. Birkholtz. I think it was earlier this year in the springtime, and he really impressed me with his, techniques, his approaches to limb lengthening. And I think he's a fantastic surgeon. So I wanted to bring him on to talk about his expertise with external fixators. So I put together a presentation for Dr. B, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. So how's everything going, Dr. B? How's it been since we last had you on the show?
Well, as you can imagine, it's busy. We're getting to the end of the year, and I find every year that increasingly the years become too short.
Yeah,
we need about another month at the end of it.
I'm telling you, man, right? just to catch up, right?
Yeah. On the other hand, they feel too long, right? We need less of them. Anyway.
Exactly. All right, guys. So here's the presentation we're going to talk about with Dr. Birkholtz today. Limb lengthening external fixators with Dr. Franz Birkholtz from the Institute of Orthopedics and Rheumatology in Stellenbosch, South Africa. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me just go full screen here. And we are on. Okay, so the agenda today is we just did our intro. Then we're going to talk about the external fixators, doing a deep dive, going over an overview to the pros and cons, comparing it to the internals versus external, devices. Why you should also choose the Institute of Orthopedics and Rheumatology with Dr. Franz Birkholtz. And then we're going to do a live Q&A at the end with Dr. B, and then we'll go ahead and end off with the show. All right, so Dr. Birkholtz, these external fixators, they've been around for a very long time. So if you don't mind, go ahead and giving us a history on the external fixators, talking about their design, and then also some of the uses that they can be used for.
Yeah, it depends on how much time you have. We can probably spend a week on this. I think as a departure point, let's just categorize them a little bit. And, external fixation is really, really old. The first examples of that goes back to Egypt, and they had some basically and Greece actually before that. So basic external fixators made of bamboo and cloth and so on, which were circular in shape and were actually ring fixators from the outset. But modern day external fixators really came into their own around the Second World War and sort of after that. And I think categorizing them is useful because we have two main families of external fixators. On the one hand, you have the monolateral devices, which really just come from the side on one side of the leg. And then we have the circular devices that literally go around the limb. And what we mostly use for modern day limb reconstruction is the circular devices. So I'll sort of stick to those. Now, they were popularized or developed by a guy by the name of Ilazarov, who was in Siberia at the time. He happened to be a general practitioner at the time and, developed the system, treated some interesting patients. And as time went on, the technique and the system became more well-known worldwide. And Dr. Paley was one of the people, together with the Italian surgeons, that were spreading this around the world. And that's how it came to the rest of us. And over time, we became more comfortable using the techniques. As far as the design is concerned, I think if we stick to the circular fixators, again, we have two main groups. On the one hand, we have the more classic Ilazarov style fixator, which is really made up of threaded rods and pins and wires and so on that are fixed to rings. And on the other hand, we have the more modern iteration of that, which is the hexapod-based circular external fixators, like the TSF or the Taylor Spatial Frame, the TL Hex, the Smart Correction device, the Max Frame. There are so many on the market now, but essentially they are different in the fact, and if you look at the picture in front of you on the screen, if you look at the bottom right of the screen, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about rings that are connected by oblique struts. And these struts are arranged in a very specific pattern, which allows us to use computer software to calculate how to adjust those struts in order to get a deformity corrected or a limb lengthened.
Gotcha.
And that's really the modern day computer capable external fixators, or the hexapod fixators, if you will. And, you know, I'm quite comfortable using, and I have used both the TSF and the TL hex extensively. And these are fantastic devices that can give us incredible accuracy in deformity correction.
Right.
The weak spot of any external fixation system is the fact that it needs to be affixed to the bone from the outside. So you have, by definition, pins or wires that traverse the soft tissue and create an opening to the bone, if you will. So it becomes a potential source of infection, and also those transfixing elements can put pressure on nerves and muscles and lead to contractures. So that could be a downside.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I think that would probably summarize your first slide, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that you were kind of transitioning perfectly right into the next one, which was the pros and cons of the X-Fixes. And you just mentioned, you know, the pins of the X-Fix were going from the outside in, and it leaves open wounds. So surface level infections are much more likely. How likely is it for a deep bone infection when you're using an external fixator? And then we'll go into the other topics as well.
Yeah, I think, look, deep bone infections are really uncommon for, let's call it, simple external fixation. So if you're not doing external fixation for the purposes of clearing infection or in diabetes or other indications, if it's just purely for, let's say, limb lengthening or deformity correction reasons, it's really, really low. We get persistent pin tract infections in about 1 in 1,000 patients. And of those, probably 1 in 10 or 1 in 50 even might get a osteomyelitis as a result. Wow. So it's really, really low. So let's say 1 in, I don't know, 10,000 or 20,000. My math, it's late at night, so my maths are not up to scratch tonight. So, but it's something in that range. So it's really, really low, much lower than with a lot of other surgeries.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned this earlier about using it for deformity correction. How accurate is it using let's say a talar spatial frame, a hexapod, for correcting the deformity like we have here, the varus or bow-leggedness, versus using an intramedullary nail?
Yeah, I think that's the fundamental benefit of an external fixator, and specifically these hexapod type fixators, is that they're really, really good at 3-dimensional corrections. So you can at the same time correct. So it's a gradual correction device. Now that you cannot do with a nail. Even all the best lengthening nails out there can only do longitudinal adjustment. So they can go longer and they can go shorter. If you need anything else from that nail, you need to do it right at the initial surgery by tilting the bone or rotating the bone. So you need to do an acute deformity correction, and then you're just adjusting length at the end. Whereas with an external fixator, you can do all those things gradually. So that's the power of it. The downside is that you have to wear that external fixator until deformity is corrected. And of course, during that time, you have a risk of pin tract infections, contractures, and so on, and pretty nasty scarring. You know, so that is why the majority of us have moved away from external fixation as a tool for cosmetic surgery. So if it's functional surgery like limb equalization or deformity correction or things like that, we tend to still use it quite extensively. But if it is for purely cosmetic reasons, most of us have started moving away because of the safety profile of the fixator.
I see. That's a really good explanation there. Now, You mentioned this a little bit earlier as well. You said that the recovery time I actually want to talk about this, the recovery time. You didn't mention this, I'm sorry. The recovery time for the X-Fix versus the different types. So we have the pure external fixator where we have just the ring, let's say on the tibias, versus something called the lengthening and then nailing, where you lengthen and then you put an intramedullary nail to stabilize the bone for healing and consolidation of the bone. And then finally, you have the simultaneous combination of the X-Fix and the internal nail, which is the lengthening over nail. So I wanted to kind of, get your take on the recovery time, the pros and cons of these three different approaches.
Yeah, no, it's a good comment, and it is very popular. So let's start at one point. So if we take an external fixation only lengthening, which is what we had up until the point where we started doing lengthening nails, the time that the external fixator has to stay on the limb is quantified in something called the external fixation index. And without getting too technical, what that means is the external fixator stays on for anywhere between 1.5 and 2 months for every centimeter that we lengthen. Okay. So to put it simply, if you have a 6 centimeter lengthening, that fixator would have to stay on for 9 months as a minimum. So it's 9 to 12 months. So it's pretty much a year out of your life, and you don't have a baby to show after the 9 months, right? So in an attempt to shorten those incredibly long times, people have started thinking of just doing the distraction with the external fixator and then doing the consolidation phase or the holding phase with another device. And that's where they started looking at lengthening and then nailing, lengthening over nails, and there should be a fourth one called lengthening and then plating, which is a similar concept. So you distract the bone with the fixator, then that gets taken off and replaced with an internal fixation device. Gotcha. Now, of course, that sounds fantastic, and it works well if you get away with it. The downside of it is that you have the presence of internal fixation devices and external fixation devices in the same limb roughly at the same time, which can increase your risk for deep bone infection quite significantly.
I see.
Because now you have a highway for organisms going from the skin into the bone, and you have a big old piece of metal in there, which doesn't have its own blood supply, doesn't have its own immunity, and that could give rise to infection. So you have a higher risk of infection. And of course, it's a risk-benefit ratio that we are willing to take in a post-traumatic deformity or something like that. But if it's a purely cosmetic situation, those of us who are really pedantic about safety are starting to move away from this technique for that reason.
I gotcha.
Of course, these techniques are quite cheap because now you don't have an expensive lengthening nail anymore. You have an external fixator that in most instances gets reused. And so it's a second-hand fixator, which doesn't really cost the surgeon too much to apply. Hopefully they're using new pins and wires to insert into the bone. And then obviously they use a fixation device, which are generally not so expensive. So you can knock off a lot of the cost of a cosmetic lengthening by doing one of these techniques. Yeah. But as with anything, what you pay is what you get. And there's a significant risk issue with these techniques. So like I say, if it's limb equalization, no problem at all. We can try that. And if somebody has a really low budget and there is a trade-off, then we can do that. But for purely cosmetic lengthenings, I would generally steer away from that technique.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because there are a lot of lengthening clinics out there who are taking the cheaper approach just to draw in and allure prospective patients who don't have a big budget to work with, and they're risking their safety and their health because of that. So that was a really good point you made there. All right. So the next,
let's circle back to that for one more moment. Yeah. Interestingly, although it's a cheaper option, it's a significantly more difficult procedure to execute from a surgical perspective. So you actually need a surgeon who's really, really, really good at what they do and can plan really, really well, because you have external fixation components that might get in the way of your nailing jig and the ways that we insert screws into the bone. So you have to plan extremely carefully. And dare I say, not many surgeons have that capability. And I'm including myself in that group. It is quite a difficult technique to actually master. And it's not impossible, but to do it well is not so easy. And we are seeing complications where people go with a very limited budget to somebody, they get it done, and then they come back with a non-union, malunion, or a failure to insert the nail because the canal was too narrow, or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, those are exactly the type of emails that I get from patients from all over the world where they go to these clinics. And I'm glad that I'm bringing on surgeons like yourself, who I know you were being humble. You have done well over, I think it's 5,000 external fixated cases to this point. And we're probably just talking about, the legs. Who knows? Because we know that the X fixes can also be used for the upper arms, correct, for discrepancies as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We use them for all kinds of indications. And maybe that's something that we can probably get into quickly as a side note, is just the indications. External fixation is really, really powerful for deformity correction. It is really, really powerful in the presence or when there is a high risk of infection already. So diabetic feet, dysvascular limbs, open fractures, osteomyelitis. So treating that group of conditions, non-unions, bone defects. And, the principles of external fixation can be applied in the upper limb or the lower limb, or indeed in smaller bones like the hand bones or the foot. So we have, a large variety of indications where we use them, and quite effectively so. But that's more in the sort of limb reconstruction arena, if you will. That's where I spend most of my time, interestingly enough. I spend very little time just purely lengthening limbs. Most of my time is spent in reconstructing limbs, avoiding amputations, treating complications. And that's where these tools are incredibly powerful.
And I think that that's where the top surgeons, exist. They exist in the limb reconstruction field, but they are just so talented that doing a stature lengthening is pretty much, a step down from that top level knowledge. So very cool. Dr. B, the next topic that I want to talk about is an external fixator versus an internal nail. Now, you kind of mentioned the pros and cons about it a little earlier, but I wanted to kind of take on or talk about a few different aspects, such as the pain. A lot of patients who do get X fixes, they mentioned that the pain is greater than when they have an internal nail. So I would like to talk a little bit about that and then go into some other points as well.
Yeah, I think when we're circling back to lengthening and using lengthening devices, there's a fundamental difference between a femoral lengthening and a tibial lengthening. So if we're talking about femoral lengthening, there's no question in my mind that the nail is far superior, just because of the amount of soft tissue around the femur. It is incredibly difficult to wear an X-fix for a prolonged period of time on your femur. It skewers your quadriceps muscles. It prevents flexion of the knee. It prevents extension of the knee. And it's just a difficult thing. You can't sleep. You can't turn over in a bed. It's just a nasty, nasty business. It's very different when you get down to the tibia, because in the tibia, you're dealing with a more distal extremity. There's a bit less soft tissue around. And there, the X-fix might have a benefit because you have two bones, and the X-fix can actually fix both quite effectively. Whereas with the nail, you're primarily fixing the tibia, and you're hoping that the fibula will move along with your little screws that you put at the top and the bottom. But it's a bit of a different animal. So in my mind, femoral lengthening, definitely no discussion, for cosmetic purposes or equalization purposes, all things being equal, let's go for a nail. For tibia, there's probably an argument to be made for both. And if you can accept the cosmetic scarring and the time frame in the external fixator. Now, coming back to your pain question, so in the femur, yes, big difference. Femoral nail is a lot less painful than a femoral X-fix. No question. In a tibia, I'm not so sure, because the tibial external fixator gives you the ability to walk on it. It's fully weight bearing if you do it properly. And because of that, the muscles move, the ankle moves, and you get rid of this post-operative pain cycle a bit quicker. Now, of course, you have pins that go through the skin, and that is uncomfortable. But my take on it is, it looks like my patients with tibial nails versus X-fixes are much more similar in terms of pain levels. It's a long-winded answer. It's both painful. I mean, we're breaking your legs, we're pulling it apart, we're putting stuff in there to hold it. So it's going to be painful regardless of what we do, right? And my job and my colleagues' jobs as the anesthetists and so on is to try and make that journey as predictable and as safe and as painless as possible. But I would be lying to you if I said it's not painful. It is painful.
Right. No, yeah, definitely. Anytime you break your legs, but yeah, you
And you
also
would know. I mean, as a previous patient, you would have firsthand
yeah,
experience.
exactly. The tibia, anything, broken legs. I broke my femur too, so I know.
Yeah, so
Very
painful.
cool. Yeah. All right, so then we already answered the third point, which was basically yes or no about stature lengthening. But for point two, I actually want to kind of go back to that for a second. You mentioned about sleeping and everything like that. It's less convenient than the internal nail, but can you talk about range of motion? Because we know that when you're lengthening for, let's say, stature, or even if you're doing it for discrepancy, the soft tissue is going to get taut. It's just, a fact. So what are the downsides for physical therapy when you have an X fix versus an internal nail?
I'm sorry, I lost you there a little bit from
Oh,
on
did you?
the internet connection, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. I've been having choppy connection lately on this software. So for physical therapy, range of motion, can you comment on the convenience of patients regaining the range of motion using an external fixator versus an internal nail?
Yeah. I think as a general rule, the internal nails have much less of an effect on range of motion, specifically on the femur for sure, hands down. In the tibia, again, I think there is an element of the advantage of weight bearing, which comes into play on the positive side for external fixator. But still, whenever we have things going through muscle, it would restrict the movement of that muscle. And, regardless of how careful we are, with an external fixator, you do tend to transfix some of the soft tissue.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
Very
it does
cool.
restrict your movement. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that was pretty comprehensive. Overview, history, the design, and the pros and cons of the X-Fix versus the newer devices on the market. But now I want to kind of talk about the future of the external fixator. First of all, is there a future for the external fixator? And if you can talk about like one of your most difficult cases that you had to do with a patient when you were using the external fixator.
Yeah, I'll start with the future of external fixation. I think that might be an easier one to answer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of us that are working on refining the techniques of external fixation, and I am also involved in that space. And we're trying to find ways to make it more reproducible, make it safer, make it more comfortable. The future of external fixation is bright, but the role of it is going to be in very specifically defined brackets of indications. So things like complex deformity correction, things like diabetic foot correction, so I think, and some forms of complex trauma and post-traumatic reconstruction. The beauty of it is a gradual three-dimensional correction tool, and that will never disappear. That remains. In the presence of infection or a high risk of infection, it remains a solid tool, much better than internal fixation. And, if you need that accuracy of correction after surgery, then the external fixator is a very powerful tool. And then the last thing that we sometimes don't think about a lot, and I see very little talk of it, is the ability to actually get the nail into the bone. People always assume that they go and see a surgeon for lengthening, they're going to automatically be able to get a lengthening nail, and they're going to lengthen out to wherever they want to be, a gazillion inches or whatever they want. The point is, a lot of us, our femurs are too small for an internal nail. We are quite limited because the internal nails cannot go down much. Even the smallest ones are 8.5 millimeters sort of diameter, 8.7 in that range, which means that you have to ream that femur to a size of about 10 or 10 and a half to just get that nail down. And simply, some people just don't have femurs that are large enough, or they are maybe bent, or there are other constraints, like they might be too short, that even our shortest nail doesn't really fit into the canal. So there are things like that might actually play into the capacity for us to use nails, and then the external fixator would be a good alternative. So that's something to be considered. So I've answered case or question 3 and 2 together, I think.
Yeah.
I see them being phased out. I do see them being used a lot less for cosmetic lengthenings. I think they are definitely going to disappear pretty much off the radar. And as soon as we have solid weight-bearing nails, that's gonna probably put a nail in the coffin of that.
I like that.
I hate it when I do that, the puns.
Right.
All right. Most difficult case, I think I'm going to answer it in a very diplomatic way. I can't think of one offhand, but I think every single case should be done with the due respect that it deserves. So every single case that we do is actually a difficult case. And I think as a surgeon, I should have that approach, that every case that we approach is very special to that patient who's involved. And as such, it should be seen as a difficult case or a case that demands our attention. The most difficult cases I've had to deal with are the ones that have had a previous surgeon attempt something which has failed. And then we do not start from zero. We actually start from minus somewhere. And that is difficult because sometimes you have compromise in biology, that the bone doesn't want to heal anymore. You might have some infection in there. You might have broken hardware, which can be really difficult to get out. Or you might actually have lost the confidence of the patient, so that you have to spend a lot of time regaining the patient's confidence before you can even start rebuilding the limb. And so those are my difficult cases.
Gotcha.
To identify one is very difficult. We've done a few.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think you're right. Like every time a patient comes in with a problem, it's like the most difficult case in the world for that patient, but and you take it from that approach. All right. So Dr. B, there was actually another patient that sent in a case, but I didn't get a chance to pull it together, but we have one here. And this goes right along with what you mentioned earlier. So this patient used the lengthening over nail method on his tibias. He was 5'3", and his bone canal, just like you mentioned earlier, was extremely small. So he said that the surgeon did not use an intramedullary nail due to the small bone cavity. It was very tiny. He said that he would have to make a custom nail, and that would just take a lot of time, and he didn't use that approach. His question was, would not having an intramedullary nail affect a non-union, or would it create some sort of deformity that he would have to get corrected later on down the line? And he had a LON on his tibia, which was a monolateral rail fixator.
Yeah, it's very, very complex question. I think, let me answer it in a sort of a global way.
Okay.
The rate of non-union for lengthening is not necessarily linked to the presence or the absence of the nail in the LON method. Okay. So the fact that you're going to get a union or not depends on things like your distraction rate. It depends on things like how the osteotomy was done, and then on stability of fixation. So if the nail is needed to provide some stability because your monolateral fixator is not stable enough, yes, then it will play a role. But in broad terms, things like the quality of the osteotomy, the distraction rate, things like that would probably play a larger role. So that's at the outset. The second thing is, sorry, it's been a bad hair day all along, and I see it's just getting worse. The second thing is that I tend to do that a lot when I think. So not working too well for my image, but anyway. It's not that I have like 10,000 people watching this or anything. So.
Right.
Like we're on a live stream.
Yeah, we're live though.
So the other point is about deformity, and that's a very interesting point, because I think LON sometimes makes us as surgeons sloppy in the way that we apply the fixators, because we think, the nail is in there, it will sort of realign everything automatically, and yeah, it's dangerous to do that, because especially with the monolateral fixators, because they only come from the one side, they are a lot less stable than circular devices, and they can't hold the deformity so well. So so we see them drift. And even with circular devices, if you do a lengthening with a pure external fixator, they tend to go into what we call procovatum, so they bend forward, and they bend outwards, they go into valgus. And that's quite a predictable thing. You can look at 10 cases of lengthenings with external fixators, with or without nails, and you would likely pick up that there are some deformities amongst them. Wow. So that is why, if we do external fixation based corrections or lengthenings, I love using hexapod capable rings, so that at any point in time I can slot in those struts, I can run the computer software, and I can straighten the bone. We're in the era where that is possible, and I think it's probably not right if we're doing cosmetic lengthening and we don't have that capability.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of feel sorry for this patient because that surgeon just kind of made that decision on the spot. He's like, oh, you have the monolateral X-fix already on your tibias. I'm not going to go through the trouble of this. Whereas the patient matters most at the end of the day. So very cool.
Yeah, and I can sort of see how that panned out. But, you know, and I'm not here to criticize any other surgeon. I mean, you know, I wasn't in the theater. I wasn't in the operating room. So, yeah, I wouldn't dare to criticize. But, you know, there is an element of planning that has to happen before any big surgery. And one of those would be to measure the canal width of the diameter of the bone and to determine that what you have on the table and what you have on your patient correspond. And, you know, if that doesn't, for whatever reason, then it should be picked up ahead of time, ideally.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Dr. B. The next segment here is some submitted questions from patients. And the first one was, how do you plan for nail alignment? So his was 2 parts. And the first part was, how would you plan for femoral lengthening to avoid any malalignment due to lengthening along the anatomical axis? And then he asked, will you use a troch entry nail or regular nailing via the piriformis entry, and why?
Yeah, I think what we see when we do long lengthenings through an antegrade approach of the femur is there's a theoretical concern that we all have that the mechanical axis will shift more lateral, so we'll push the leg more into valgus. And yes, that's true, but it's also not true in practice, because what we see is the nails do tend to go into a little bit of varus, so they bend a little bit the other way because of the forces that are exerted on them. So if you take the resultant of the nails bending inwards a little bit and the axis shifting outwards a little bit, the end result is pretty much straight. And straight enough not to cause significant problems. So for the vast majority of patients, antegrade nailing with that little bend that we anticipate would actually be okay. There are patients where it is feasible or better to actually go retrograde to correct deformities, but that is not part of this question that we're dealing with. So that was the first half. The second half of the question was around troch entry versus piriformis entry. For every 10 nails I would do 9 with the piriformis entry. It's a straight shot down. We do not create secondary deformities. The problem with the troch entry is you've got a curved entry pathway that the nail has to follow, but the first part of the nail is straight. So when you start inserting the nail, it comes from the side of the femur, but because the nail is straight, it's going to want to bump out the medial cortex of the femur. And we see that if you look critically at some of the troch entry nails that are out there, the x-rays, you would find that there are little butterfly segments, little comminuted segments on the inside of the femur where the straight part of the nail bumped that out before it took the turn and went down the femur. So from just a pure geometric point of view, piriformis entry nails pretty much every single time, except for the young individuals with open growth plates. But again, that's a completely different argument.
Right. Okay, very cool. All right, the next question that was submitted was, are blood transfusions safe as HIV is more prevalent in South Africa?
Yeah, good question, important question. I think first things first is blood transfusions are not done routinely for every cosmetic lengthening procedure or any lengthening or reconstruction procedure we do. We probably do blood transfusions in probably about 10%, and that's just a thumbs up, but about 10% of big cases that we do. So we try and reserve the blood transfusions for the real cases where it's needed. The second thing is that South Africa is blessed with a very long history of blood banks. We've had blood transfusion services and blood banks for many years, and I might stand corrected, but our oldest one is really, really, really old. You know, it's like 50 or 60 years old already. It's a long, long time. Pretty much when blood transfusion started as a mainstream thing, there was a service started in South Africa. And these blood donors are all tested routinely for HIV. They are tested for hepatitis B, C, and the whole alphabet. And, you know, they are very often what is interesting in our country is they are volunteers. They don't get paid to donate blood.
Right.
So you don't have the risky thing that we sometimes see where people sell their blood to the blood bank just to get some drug money to go and mainline again, because you see that in some instances. And in our country, because it's not incentivized by money, the risk profile of the average donor is actually quite low. So it's an interesting question, and it's a complex answer. But yeah. So would I take a blood transfusion? Absolutely, I would. I would give it to my kids. I would give it to my wife, provided it's necessary to save their life.
Okay, gotcha.
If we get into that place where it's necessary to have a blood transfusion because you're gonna die, then we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do it safely.
Gotcha. Very cool. That's I'm sure that's going to make them rest easily. Okay. And then the third question was, do patients have to remain local in Stellenbosch during the lengthening phase? So if they came to you for stature lengthening, typically, let's say 3 inches on the femurs, typically about 12 weeks, would you recommend that they stay local?
Yeah, I would not recommend it. I would absolutely insist on it.
Okay.
I think it's important because that's the risk phase, or the main risk phase of a lengthening. That's where things go south in terms of nerve stretches, in terms of loss of range of motion at the knee or the ankle, ballerina foot, duck ass, all those things that you guys talk about. So that's where things go pear-shaped, and that's where, if there is going to be a complication, it needs to be monitored, picked up, and treated by the treating surgeon sooner rather than later.
Right.
So I'm quite safety orientated, and I think it's important from that perspective that patients stay local. Now, they don't have to stay in Stellenbosch. They can sort of travel the country and do a bit of a safari or do whatever they want to do, but they need to be available for follow-ups every second week.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that is until the end of lengthening. Now, sometimes we run into trouble with visas and things like that, where we only have a 3-month visa, and then it gets really tight in terms of distraction and and surgery and lag period and all of that. Then we sometimes sneak in just ahead of 90 days in terms of the visa. But yeah, all things being equal, they need to be around the area, or at least available for follow-ups every second week during lengthening.
I love that. Yeah, just keeping them close, and the surgeon who performed the surgery is taking care of them along the way. Yeah. Very, very cool.
Exactly.
Awesome.
And can we do it differently? Yes, of course we can. I mean, we can theoretically send somebody anywhere in the world, and they can zoom in, and we can. But does that happen safely? Generally not.
No.
So yes, it's possible, but I would not do it. I think safety is the first concern, and certainly if we're talking about cosmetic or stature lengthening, safety is not negotiable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And most of the patient complications that I hear about are from patients who don't stay local to their surgeons. So, there we go. Yeah. All right. So now I actually wanted to kind of dive into you at the Institute of Orthopedics and Rheumatology in Stellenbosch. So, Dr. B, if you would, in your own words, why should patients choose to do lengthening with you at the IOR?
I have no idea. No,
I love it. He's so humble.
No, I think my tagline for my personal brand, if you will, is healthcare with the care in capital letters. It is experience and it's innovation. And it's those 3 words that I think define what my philosophy is around what I do. And healthcare with the care in capital letters is very dear to me, because healthcare is the industry we are in, but the care part is often lacking. And so that is really important to me, that we provide the care that the patient needs. Right. So that I think comes as a standard when you come and see me. Right. As you've seen on these interviews, what you see is pretty much what you get. I am who I am, and I don't make excuses for it. People either like me or don't. I don't care. I'm not here to separate you from your money. I'm here to treat you as a patient. Right. So. And so that's my philosophy, and I think if that resonates with you, then I would be the right person to treat you. What I do like about where we are situated at the Institute of Orthopedics and Rheumatology is that it is a super specialist institute dedicated purely to orthopedic surgery. So our nursing staff, our facility, our operating room, our rehab team, everybody is geared towards orthopedics. Okay. So we're not just an add-on to a big multi-speciality hospital.
Mhm.
We actually an entity in our own right dedicated to doing the best level of orthopedic care that we can within the
Nice.
context of where we are and, you know, in the wider world. So
Right.
I hope that answers the question to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes me feel at ease because it's like, you have it's pretty much like a huge, realm of orthopedics and all these specialists there to take care of you. You're in good care. Okay, so the next question is the type of procedures you offer at the IOR. We know that you do amazing deformity correction, limb lengthening. Yeah, if you want to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm humbled to be joined by a number of very, very good orthopedic surgeons, all at the top of their game, and
Mhm.
each one of us has I dare to say, a world-class offering in terms of what we do.
Yeah.
So we've got knee surgeons that are really, patient-specific, very specialized, knee arthroplasties using robotic guidance, sort of
Mhm.
that level of thing. We've got sports guys that do knee ligaments, ankle ligaments. We've got a hand surgeon that reattaches nerves that were pulled off in accidents. So we've got spinal surgeons that make people walk again, that just do incredible stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm a very small cog in a very big wheel here, and we're about 12 specialists in the IOR, and each of us brings something very specific to the party.
Mm.
So if you need any orthopedic surgery, whatever it may be, it could be done at the IOR.
Okay.
In terms of my skill set, my background is mostly trauma and
Mm.
then limb reconstruction. So if you break something, I will try and fix it. I'm that guy that is stupid enough to try and fix Humpty Dumpty. If you have bits and pieces of bone and limb missing, I'm the guy that tries to reconstruct it before they cut off your leg.
Mm.
And if you do end up with the amputation, it's my responsibility to make you walk and function as highly as you can,
Wow.
because amputation reconstruction is also very dear to my heart and a very important part of what we do.
Mm.
But yeah, so pretty much orthopedics, we can cover anything at the IOR. If you're looking for me specifically, it will be most.
Oh, I think it cut off a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, I think it kind of dropped off for a little. I'll have to fix this, but yeah. Okay, so you can cover pretty much everything. Okay, that's amazing. So Dr. B, let's say that there was a prospective patient who said, "I really like Dr. B, listening to him today talk about X fixes, but I want to come to him for stature lengthening." What would be the process from having a consult with you to booking a surgery?
Yeah, it's a very individualized process. I think we normally have a email consultation initially. So there's an email reach out. I ask a couple of questions. I get a feel for who the patient is, and then we generally offer a free Zoom consultation,
Mm-hmm.
which is generally about half an hour to 40 minutes or so. Which then normally sets them at ease and allows me to also get a feel for whom I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are red flags that go on my side, then obviously I pull the plug and I say, maybe you're not the right patient for me. And likewise from their side, if they feel that I'm not the right fit for them, because it's a long journey that we're going to have to walk together. Once that's done, then generally we tend to start looking at logistics in terms of dates and potential slots and take it from there.
Gotcha. Oh no, I think it's dropping again. Hold on just a second, Dr. B. I think it dropped again. Can you hear me okay? This happened the other day. I don't know what's happening here. Just a second. Let me okay, there you go. Okay. Yeah, I can hear you again.
Yeah, so basically email, reach out, then followed up by a Zoom call, and then some logistics at the back end of that.
Okay.
Going forward for our international patients, we have that very exciting collaboration with you that we will use your services as the point of the port of call, if you will.
Awesome. Very
But of
cool.
course, that doesn't stop people to reach out to me privately, but
Absolutely.
we will direct them via your group.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
It just streamlines the process.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So basically, as you kind of see, Dr. B is going to be part of the collective. But for the
Oops,
meanwhile,
did
I
I
didn't.
jump the gun? I'm sorry.
What's that?
Did I jump the gun? I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. We just haven't fully launched officially, but it's okay because I'm slowly revealing the surgeons one by one. So you guys, they know
Okay.
about you.
I'm revealed.
But yeah, guys,
Sorry.
I'll be posting. No, you're fine. You're fine. I think it's a perfect surprise. Merry Christmas. It's like, so yeah, in the meanwhile, so I'm still working on Dr. B's booking portal page, his surgeon portal page. So after the stream is finished, I'm going to post his website and his contact information, his email below. I didn't get a chance to do that. I was running a little late to the stream here, but I'll do that right after. So you can reach out to him as soon as today, start booking your consultations and talking about booking your surgery with him. Okay. All right. So now we're going to go into our live Q&A with Dr. Birkholtz. So get your best questions ready. And then, yeah, like I said, if you want to book a consultation with him, I'll have his contact information posted below. So let me just stop sharing here. And we are back. Okay, so let me just pull us back. And yeah, we got quite a bit of questions in here. So let's see. First question. All right. From JM. Dr. Birkholtz, do you have long-term patients, say 5 to 10 years, that lengthened one segment and have developed arthritis in the hip or the knee due to higher femur to tibia ratio?
I can say no, but the real answer is I don't know, because we don't follow up routinely. I don't think anybody follows their patients routinely for that long. Generally, our cosmetic lengthening patients disappear once they've had a successful lengthening, and I think they put that chapter behind them. So, so the short answer is not that I'm aware of, but they may be out there. Who knows?
Okay, very cool. He has another question: is there any way to gauge if a patient will have a non-union based on the lab tests during the screening, like the pre-op or the pre-test before the surgery? Does low calcium, D3, or other metabolites give signal for a non-union?
No, is the short answer. We wish we knew, but bone healing is such a multifactorial process that it's really difficult to give a risk stratification of who will heal and who will not. Right. So we don't have a single test where we can say you've got a non-union and you won't. But vitamin D does play into it. And, you know, vitamin D levels should be adequate whenever we're embarking on something like this. So it's good to have that tested beforehand. And if it is low, to supplement that. But that's a single thing, and that won't necessarily preclude a non-union from happening.
Okay, very cool.
The best thing you can do is not to smoke.
Yeah, definitely don't smoke, guys.
Exposed to non-unions. Or vape, for that matter. It has the same effect.
Absolutely. And don't lie about that either, guys, because you'll just hurt yourself in the long run. So, yeah. He has some great questions here. So he's saying, Dr. B, can you list some of your complications that you've had during surgery? Have you ever experienced a pulmonary embolism, fat embolism, compartment syndrome, non-union, or none so far?
I think it would be dishonest to say that I don't see complications. All of us that operate enough see complications. I've had a patient with if we're talking cosmetic lengthening, stature lengthening group of patients, then I've had a patient with fat embolism that we picked up early and we treated successfully, and he went back to the normal ward the next day and he's fine, he's reached his goal. Pulmonary embolism in our limb lengthening group, no, we haven't seen that, but we have seen that in the post-traumatic group, so we've seen them. Compartment syndrome, at this stage, we haven't seen that in any of our lengthening patients, but we see them in the acute trauma group from time to time.
Okay.
Non-unions, not in the cosmetic lengthening group. We sometimes see delayed unions where they're a little bit slow to heal, and then there are strategies that we follow to try and optimize that. We've had we've had one premature consolidation on osteotomy where we had to redo the osteotomy. And then we've had some mechanical problems with some of the nails, bent screws, backed out screws, broken screws, and one guy that broke his nail in an accident. So we've had a variety of complications.
Yeah.
The important argument here is not to choose a surgeon who never has complications, because if he says he never has complications, he's probably lying. No, I'm honest. You know, there's a complication rate to any surgery.
Absolutely.
And that rate is about 10%. You know, regardless of surgery. So if somebody says he has no complications, be very careful of that.
Okay.
Either he defines complications in a different way, or he's not being completely honest.
Right.
The important thing is to choose a surgeon who can firstly prevent as many complications as possible, and secondly, treat them when they occur before they become big things. Now, all of these instances that I've mentioned of complications we've had, none of those patients lost function as a result of the complication. None of those patients didn't get to their target as a result of the complication. And that's really I think when you talk about complications, that's probably where you should measure the success, is not whether they exist, because something like a pulmonary embolus or a fat embolism is probably related to the patient's genetics more than what I as a surgeon do.
Yeah.
But how I pick that up and how I manage that patient, that's pretty important, because that's in my hands.
Absolutely. How you treat it. Yeah. And guys, we've said this time and time again. It's about if the surgeon knows how to treat the complications that arise, and how to, like you said, prevent as many as possible along the way. That's what makes a good surgeon. Okay. This is the question that every patient probably wants to know. They probably wanted us to just jump right to this question. So for stature lengthening, cosmetic limb lengthening, what is your total cost? And do you have housing in South Africa built into the cost?
The current package as it stands is $50,000 US, which is a nice round number. It does include everything in the hospital. So basically the hospitalization, the nails, the surgeon, the anesthetist, everything that you need in the hospital, plus the physiotherapy during the hospitalization. That hospitalization is for somewhere between 7 and 10 days. And then after that, what is also included is another 2 weeks.
Oh, man. So sorry.
Yep.
It kind of dropped again. So you said also what's included is 2 weeks of, is it? Yeah. I don't know why it's dropping off here. Just a second. There we go. Okay. Try that again.
Yeah. Shall we try that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's better.
Okay. So 2 weeks in the dedicated rehabilitation facility with daily physiotherapy, meals included, accommodation included, and that's for another 2 weeks. So the package includes the first, say, 3 weeks after surgery, which basically takes you from the start of this, from the surgery to the start of distraction to the first 2 week follow-up once distraction is established. So all of that's included. And then from there, the patient would typically be ready to actually stay alone. And by that time, they're pretty desperate to actually get out of the healthcare facility. So they prefer to be on their own. And, then there's ample opportunity in the area, either Airbnbs, hotels, low-level accommodation, higher-level accommodation. And, we don't include that into the cost because it's so variable. Every patient wants something else. I'm not in the accommodation business, so I don't run my own guest house or anything like that, and I'm not interested in going there. So I would encourage patients to find their own accommodation at that point.
Okay, gotcha.
But there's ample opportunities. It's a student town, so there's a lot of stuff around. Also, there's good support by Uber and Bolt and these type of e-hailing type of services. So that's quite available and freely available. Also, delivery of groceries. There's a vibrant industry around that. So, if you want to have your shopping delivered and cook at home or whatever, or takeaways, it's not the middle of Africa as you might expect.
Exactly, guys. You will have life. You will be able to live life while you're in Stellenbosch. Very cool. And the really cool thing is Dr. B sent me his stature lengthening brochure, which I'll also post a link to, like an online PDF version of it. So you can take a look at that after the stream. Just give me about 10 minutes once we finish to get those links posted below. Okay. The next question that we have in here is about what we talked about earlier, Dr. B. Marius is asking about how confident are you that the stride nail or weight-bearing nail, if the name changes, will be back before the end of 2023? Is it likely?
I have no idea. I'm not on the inside loop of this nail's development or any other for that matter. I know the companies are desperate to provide a weight-bearing nail. I don't see that happening too soon, though.
Okay.
They've pretty much burnt their fingers quite badly with the stride nail. With all respect, I think it had some unexpected consequences, and it's going to be a long time before we can convince somebody like the FDA to approve something similar again.
Yeah.
Unless it's fundamentally completely different, I don't see it coming back quite soon, to be honest. But, that's just my personal opinion. That's not born out of any facts.
All right. Benjamin has a question for you. He's saying, when using the external devices, how does sitting on the toilet and taking showers, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a really important and practical question. If it's a femoral, well, let's start with a tibial frame. That's easier. If it's a tibial frame below the knee, then sitting on the toilet is not too difficult.
Right.
You might just need to extend your knee a little bit more than usual, which might have some balancing act issues, coming to think about it. But generally, that shouldn't be too difficult. When you're dealing with a femoral frame, of course, that changes things fundamentally, because now just sitting on a chair, sitting on a toilet, fitting into where you would normally fit into a car or something like that would become significantly more difficult. So that's why femoral external fixators we tend to shy away from nowadays. Showers, once the surgical incisions are healed, we allow the patients to take a shower, and there's a specific way in which we manage the pin tracts to prevent infection. But showering is perfectly acceptable. What we don't allow is immersion in a bath. Because then you get all your skin organisms soaking on the bath. It's actually quite gross if you think about it.
Yeah.
Everything from your perineum and your skin and everywhere floats around on the bath water, and it can go anywhere into these pins and into your body. It's actually quite disgusting if you think about it.
Right. I feel like I just watched an episode of CSI when you said that.
Yeah, exactly. It's quite gruesome. But and then swimming in the ocean is another question. Swimming in a swimming pool or the ocean, I tend to allow that generally. Within reason. Don't sink. Don't get it too dirty. But you can swim. The exception is some of the public pools, which might not always be the cleanest, especially the heated ones and gyms and places like that. And then freshwater, we try and stay out of rivers and dams and that sort of stuff. Because there's some really interesting organisms around there.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're making me super cautious about going to any sitting pool of water now.
I had too much microbiology at university, so I'm like a OCD freak as far as that stuff is concerned. Actually, it should be CDO, because if it was done correctly, it would be alphabetical. So then it would be CDO and not OCD, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
compulsive disorder, it would be CDO. Anyway,
right. Yeah, they should change that now. the Birkholtz edit.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, here we go. We have another question. This is a good one from Jersey Baby. He's asking, what I think it means devices do you currently operate with? Yeah.
Yeah, if we limit it to stature lengthening, cosmetic lengthening.
I gotta figure out.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm gonna figure this out. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, please continue.
I don't know, somewhere in the internet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we tend to use, for femoral lengthenings, we use Precise and Fitbone. I at the moment use about half of each, so about 50% of my cases are done with either. So I'm quite comfortable with both nails.
Okay, very cool. That's awesome. The Fitbone and the Precise, are they about the? Does that change the cost any? Okay.
We've been able to negotiate the same cost for both.
Okay, very cool. Let's see. So this was JM's question. He was asking, do you offer the Bone or any other weight-bearing nails, or just the Precise 2 and the Fitbone?
I don't offer the Bone. I have no experience with it directly. I like the weight-bearing aspect of it. I do not like the rotation that you need to adjust it. So from a pain perspective, but also from a potential for disrupting the callus. But I should probably not comment on the nail because I have no experience with it, and I don't see that we'll start using it. I don't think the potential for difficulties in controlling the rate would offset the benefit of having the weight-bearing aspect. So I'm quite happy to provide a safe alternative with the Precise 2 or with the Fitbone.
Okay, very cool. All right, so we have a couple more questions here that are pretty much newer questions. Let's see. Pam, the one, is asking, how many months before surgery should I start stretching to get the most out of it? And then on top of that is Jersey Baby's question about why is stretching so important? Must I do it every day, or can it be 3 to 4 times per week during lengthening? So this is a stretching kind of question.
Okay, stretching. I love stretching. I think there's actually two questions here. The one is for pre-op,
Yeah.
for sort of pre-op preparation and conditioning, and the other one is during lengthening and after lengthening, I presume. So the pre-op one is easy. We don't really know whether it makes a huge difference. And I think Dr. Paley alluded to that in one of his things, and I know he doesn't feel very strongly that improving your flexibility makes a big difference. And I would refer to him. He's the guru. He's got the most experience. I do think logically, though, I would want to go into a lengthening with muscles that are as supple and as long as I can have them.
Right.
And also the ITB. The ITB is something that gets us into trouble quite a lot. And you can certainly not necessarily stretch it out, but you can definitely mobilize it a little bit with foam rolling and things like that. And I think that will serve us well. I think there's another benefit to stretching, which is maybe sort of a hidden benefit. And that is if you can get a patient into a routine of regular stretching before surgery, it shows commitment to the process, and it actually gives you that routine going into the surgery. Then you're already in a routine of daily stretching, and then it makes that a little bit easier going forward. So I think that's the one side. In preparation, I would strongly advise it. I don't think there's a specific time point. It's like planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So, if you're considering the surgery, flexibility has so many other benefits to our lives beyond lengthening that all of us should spend much more time stretching.
Absolutely.
Just look at the guys from the East, squatting and stretching and sitting on the floor eating. I mean, that's how we should live. That's good. It opens your energy, and it's important. Anyway, so again, I digress. Let's go to the during surgery. I always like to say, I lengthen your bones with the device, but you lengthen the soft tissue with your stretching and with your physiotherapy. And that's an important concept. So don't limit it. Do as much as you can tolerate. If it's daily, then it's daily. And remember that the physiotherapist is not the only one that does the stretching. Actually, the patient is in control of the soft tissue rehabilitation. And what that means is you don't have to wait for the physio to pitch up once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day for you to be doing your stretching. So they can show you, they can monitor you, absolutely important, but you're in charge of that as a patient. And you need to take control of that and continue doing it, whether the physiotherapist is there or not. It's actually what you do when they're not there that actually gives you the benefit, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, let's think about it. How long is a physio session really? It's like 45 minutes to an hour. And then how much time do you have in the day by yourself? It's like all those other hours. So
just repeat that a couple of times during the day, and you're actually tripling the effect of that single physiotherapy session.
Absolutely. And would you say, in your opinion, that the more you stretch, the better chance you have to get to your lengthening goal?
I would think it makes logical sense. Whether that's scientific or whether we can prove it in science, I'm not sure. But I certainly think it makes logical sense. If my muscles are more supple, if my nerves are gliding better, then the chances of something getting stuck somewhere is going to be less.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Very cool.
Must be. It's just logical.
All right. So we have 2 more questions here. DJ Cyborg, I like the name. He's asking, are stature patients more common or discrepancy deformity patients in your practice?
In my practice, way more discrepancy and deformity patients, post-traumatic patients. The stature lengthenings or the cosmetic lengthenings are a really, really small part of my practice. And I ideally want to keep it that way. It's not something that I want to create this big business out of, and that I only do that. I'm not into that game. I like helping patients. So whatever they need, that's what I provide. But I can see that I will probably continue doing my deformities and my discrepancies for a very long time to come.
Absolutely. Very cool. And I think that's how it should be. It's like a surgeon starts with correcting things and fixing things and then making you taller in the back end. So, all right. And then the last question that we have here from JM, I think there might be one more, but anyway, he's saying if somebody did have a non-union, what are some of the techniques you use to treat it? Do you use the accordion methods, slow down distraction, bone grafting, etc.?
Yeah, all of the above, not all on the same patient at the same time, but we use different techniques. The easiest one is not to get into that situation in the first place, which is sometimes difficult to predict, of course, as we've said, but keeping your distraction rates relatively slow is important. Making sure your osteotomies are done in a proper way so that the bone grows. But then if we do run into trouble and it does look like the regenerate is slow. If we're still distracting, we can just slow it down. That works quite well. But of course, if we stop distracting, that's where it becomes a bit difficult. With an external fixator, you can destabilize the frame, you can build in dynamizers, so you can modulate the biomechanics on the outside of the leg. But with a nail, you can't do that. So so then we stuck with things like accordion maneuvers and so on.
Okay.
And sometimes even a slight increase in the weight bearing might be necessary to actually get it to heal.
Yeah. I know that. I think it was actually in your initial interview, you mentioned the mechanical stress helps stimulate that osteogenesis as well. Very cool.
Exactly.
All right. And this last question here, it's kind of funny. I think I just want to have you answer it just for the fun of it. He's saying, so if a patient was wearing an external device, what happens if the patient gets attacked by pit bull dogs and ended up biting the external device? Would it lead to a severe case? And how would you solve that?
We need to define who's getting bitten by whom.
Exactly.
Is it the patient or the dogs biting?
The dogs. Right.
Then, yeah, no, and who's got the severe case, because the dog is going to end up with bleeding gums, and you might have that. But no, in all fairness, we've seen all kinds of strange things happen to patients in external fixators. We've just recently had a patient who was in a bad car accident with an external fixator on and had some fractures next to the fixator. So we've seen all kinds of things, and it's like any complex problem. You just break it down into simpler, smaller bits, and you attack each bit, sequentially. So these fixators are incredibly strong. So the chances of a dog destroying the regenerate is almost zero. What I would be more worried about is the break in the skin, potentially with the bite wounds, potential for infection, things like that. And of course, what on earth you're doing next to some pit bull dogs with your external fixators? You should always be in a position where you can get away, right? So
there you go, Benjamin. Now you know what to do when there's like a pack of pit bull dogs coming for you. Very cool. Awesome. Well, Dr. Birkholtz, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and doing this presentation, amazing presentation on the external fixators and comparing and contrasting it with the internal nails. Speaking about your amazing practice at the IOR. Guys, if you want to reach out to Dr. Birkholtz, after the stream is over, I'm going to post all of his, contact information below, so you can reach out to him via email. He can check out his website. I'll also post a link to his stature lengthening brochure, so you can kind of see what it includes, the price, all the things, accommodations. So you can kind of figure that all out. And then, yeah, if you're interested, he said he offers free consultations. Just make sure you're serious about this. You can still bounce ideas with him. I'm sure he doesn't mind, but really have a real reason why you want to get this. You don't waste his time. And yeah, so guys, pump your love in the chat for Dr. Birkholtz for coming on today. Dr. B, I thank you so much. We're going to have you on more and more. And yeah, I just want to thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great chatting to you. And yeah, apologies for the hair again. I see it's going I look like
not at all. Yeah, no, it looks great. It looks great. All right, guys, until next time, this is Victor from Cyborg for Life signing out. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.